All right, good afternoon, everyone. How are you? And you're sitting close to the front for a change. Wow, that's super. Okay, well, welcome to the Science Café. We've been doing this for a lot of years. It's sponsored by the Ohio University Research Division and the local chapter of Sigma Xi, the Scientific Honor Society. And if you'd like to learn more about that group, be happy to talk with you and maybe even sign you up as a member. So I'm Howard Duvall. I serve as the Vice President for Sigma Xi. I'm a faculty member in the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry. We're doing this live in person and also online on YouTube. So if you want to go back and listen afterwards, you can go to the link and you'll be able to replay the YouTube probably within the next 24 hours or so. If anyone needs any further assistance today, please see Roxanne. She's already waved her hand at you a few times, and the like. So the way you get that t-shirt is this is an interactive presentation. We strongly encourage your questions, and that's how you get the t-shirt. That's not a good or a bad, just you have to ask a question. So raise your hand. We'll walk around with a microphone. We'll hand it to you for you to ask your question and then proceed. So before we start today, I want to announce next month's Science Café. It is Wednesday, November 2, same time, same place, so 5 o'clock, Baker Theater. It will be presented by Professor Lynn Harder from Communication Studies, and she'll be talking on the poetics and politics of storytelling. So today, we're glad and we want to welcome Associate Professor Viorel Popescu. I think I got it that close. Okay. Department of Biological Sciences, College of Arts and Sciences, and he's talking about the secret lives of hashtag, or for those old folks, number sign, real Bobcats of Ohio.
Okay, thank you, Howard. All right, thanks, Howard, and thank you, Rox, and the Research Division for inviting me to Science Café for the second time. Very excited to be here, and very excited to see so many of you in the audience. So thank you for coming here to watch our annual Funny Cat video show, which will air in just a second. So today we're going to be talking about bobcats, right? So I'll encourage your questions. We'll give a brief overview of what are bobcats, right? And then think about science and management implications. So we're going to be talking about bobcats, not those guys' bobcats. We don't want to know about those secret lives. But instead, I'd like to introduce our main character, right? The bobcat, Lynx rufus. It's a species that does not really need any introduction for Ohio University. But maybe I'll give you a couple of tips here and some information that maybe you didn't know. So bobcats are probably one of the most successful mammals in North America. They have the broadest geographic distribution of any mammal except for raccoons. Okay, so tons of bobcats, right? So this raises some very interesting questions, right, and some observations, right? So you have bobcats in Maine and upstate New York, and you have bobcats in the desert, and you have bobcats in the Sierras, and you have bobcats in the Appalachian, right? So this tells us that they are very, very adaptable and flexible in terms of where they can live, right? So they're that's why they're very, very successful, right? So you can find them in the swamps in Florida, you can find them in the desert, you can find them in Appalachian forest, you can find them even going a little bit into the, this is all desert here, right? So that's because they're very, very apt at finding lots of sources of food. So they primarily eat rodents, and I'll show you a few videos of that as well. So squirrels and all sort of other mammals. They, like all the cats, they're very, very, very picky. If you guys have cats, probably know that they're picky, right? So unlike coyotes or wolves or any other canids that can eat other things other than meat, right? So wolves can eat apples and blueberries and all sort of other things. Cats like meat, right? So they're super carnivorous. They all, that's all they eat. So if they can find food, they can survive there. So we have bobcats in Ohio, right? So this is a picture from just last year, which is actually sent to me by New York bestseller author James Clear, who just moved into Ohio in the Hocking Hills. And he had some really nice cameras, and he provided this picture. So they are they're recovering in Ohio, and I'll go over it in just a little bit. And they have the life history of a cat. They can breed really fast. They can have many kittens, and if the litter, something happens, they gets predated or something, they can get into estrus right away, and they can have another litter, right? So that also makes them so that they're quite successful. And you can find a lot of animals in Ohio, in Hocking Hills, and not only. And there are, big old mama with 3 little kittens here, and we see this quite a bit, right? So they're breeding and they're doing quite well. They also do what cats do. If you do have cats, they like to just roll around. And I'll tell the story about that video in just a little bit. But it was great when we started this project to really see that there are tons of them around, and they seem to be doing quite well. So when you think about bobcats, right? So they are really widely distributed. So they've been living with people, around people for a very, very long time. So before European settlers got here, the bobcat has a lot of symbolism in Native American culture as well, right? And it's the symbol of a lot of different things, right? Beauty, you think about bobcats as something beautiful, like cat, cuddly, effective, but also very stealthy, right? They're like able to catch squirrels, as you'll see, but also self-reliance and also, we call it moxie, or like, grit. Right? So when you think about, I'd like you to think about what you thought a bobcat would like really mean for you, and then kind of put that in the context, right, beyond being a bobcat. Yes?
Sorry, how did it get its name? What is Bob in the cat?
That's a good question. It comes from the tail, right? There's a bobbed tail, pretty short tail, and it's not as short as you'd think. It can be kind of like this big sometimes, but it's a cat that has a bobbed tail. It's plain and simple. Yes.
Can we get this so we can ask questions whenever? So,
go for it.
Second slide of the distribution method.
Yeah.
If they're able to survive in such diverse areas, like you said, the Sierras, Appalachians, whatnot. Oh, there's a microphone. If they're able to survive in those such diverse areas, what's keeping them out of the whole Midwest area there? Like, is that what we're getting into?
I'll tell you in a second.
Okay, thank you.
But thank you. That's not a question.
So I've heard lots of stories of people being brought up by wildlife. Has anyone ever been brought up by bobcats?
Sorry, can you repeat that again? Can you please? Oh, raised by bobcats. Oh. I don't think they would be very good human parents. Just because they're cats, I think. I'm not biased against cats, study cats, but thank you.
Okay, thank you. Based on the stuff you highlighted here, self-reliance, perception, and all those beautiful attributes, have there been attempts to domesticate bobcat?
That's a good question, and as far as I know, not really. Like a lot of the wild cats, they're wild. Most cats are actually cats are absolutely amazing. If you have a your domestic cat, it can go feral or wild in like 1 or 2 generations. So it can go back and forth. So as far as I know, people mistakenly took on kittens they thought they were a cat. They found them like maybe an abandoned kitten, bobcat kitten on the side of the road. And when they brought him home, they realized that they can't live with them. They're just basically a bunch of claws and teeth, basically. Fur, claws, and teeth. You know. Thank you. All right. Okay, so we'll get to that question in a second. Cool. So this is where the story goes, right? So to the main character, let's talk about how come the bobcats are recovering in Ohio, right? And then the real million-dollar question here that it's on the mind of a lot of people in the state of Ohio: trap or not to trap? So to talk about recovery, we have to actually go back in history a little bit more, like before European settlers came here, where Ohio looked nothing like it was a different world, basically. It looked nothing like today, right? So Ohio, prior to the European settlers coming to North America, used to be home for bears and bison and wolves and mountain lions and elk, right? All sort of species that right now we're just thinking, well, they're out west, they're somewhere, they're not, obviously not here, and they've never been here. So fast forward a couple hundred years, and then you get this, right? So early 1900s, most of animals were extirpated. Most species of mammals, large-bodied mammals, were extirpated from Ohio and other Midwest states because of massive deforestation, right? So the green here is forest. So forest is gone, habitat was gone, animals were gone, right? So that was promoted by cultivating land and the settlers and all that kind of stuff, right? So bobcats disappeared from Ohio in 1850, right? Along with a whole bunch of other species. And they were not they were not in Ohio for more than 100 years, right? It took them almost 100 years to make a comeback. And the reason they were able to make a comeback is because we allowed for the land to recover and heal itself to some extent, right? So nowadays, this is forest, right? So the moment habitat is back, forest is back, and not necessarily just forest, but just the fact that it's not just crops and people, right? To get some natural types of habitat are back, then things are coming back. So now we have bobcats, we have deer, we have bears. There's a bear that's been sighted around New Albany recently, and they will come in Athens, in Athens and everything. We have otters back. We have all sort of other species back, right? So it's kind of a really cool story. Usually, when you think about wildlife and conservation and that kind of stuff, it's all doom and gloom, and it's just like you don't want to watch anything because it's always things are disappearing, right? And this is kind of a unique situation where things are really coming back, and we don't really bring them back.
I have a question from Penny online, which is related. She said she has lived in rural Athens County her whole life, 57 years. She gave herself up. And she has never seen a bobcat. Is that odd? Are they spotted a lot in our area?
That's a good question. It is not odd. I mean, they are very stealthy. It's very rare that you see a bobcat. I think I've seen 2 bobcats in 7 years. However, in recent years, the number of sightings around here have been kind of skyrocketed. So we're in this really amazing period of time in Ohio where we're seeing this really almost crazy growth of the population. So like when I moved here 7 years ago, there was almost no sightings around around Athens. And now people see them as Stroud's Run. I saw them on all 33. People see them on cameras all the time, right? So she's likely to see more, or it's likely to see them more often. Yes?
Yeah, Viorel,
Yes.
you talked about the numbers skyrocketing for the bobcats, but can that not be potentially artificial because of the proliferation of trail cams?
That's a great point, and I'll talk a little bit about it later. These are not necessarily trail cam sightings. It's just people just seeing them on the road, and also from roadkill. right? So I'll talk a little bit like cats and roads don't mix. And camera traps, yes, indeed, everybody has a camera trap in their backyard right now, and you see this crazy growth. But we also see that's not the only sign, right? So we actually see a lot of roadkill animals in all these places. So that's actually more reliable data because it's an animal in hand, basically, even if it's dead. Yeah.
I think you may have partially answered the question I wanted to ask was that, if someone does see a bobcat, is there a way that they can report that? I guess, how do you track those personal stories of appearances?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And there's the Ohio Division of Wildlife has a wildlife reporting website, like a page, and basically they need some proof. So if you have a picture, that's ideal to do so. So that's how all this information gets accumulated. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Okay. Yeah, I think that was kind of part of my question too. But I saw my first bobcat on Friday driving along the road. It was amazing. I was driving. It was maybe around like 8 or 9 o'clock, and it was just right there. And I own some. It was pretty close to like where my house is, and we have some acreage and everything. Are there certain types of things that we can do to make our woods more a better habitat?
That's actually a tough one. That's a good question. It's kind of a tough one to answer. Simply because, like I said, they can live in a lot of places, including in suburban areas. I mean, they're all over like Connecticut and suburbia, and like you see them coming into towns a lot in California and such. So not that much you can do, really. As long as there's squirrels and there's some small mammals and food for them, that's pretty much all they need, and maybe not cut the forest down. Yes.
Say you're walking on a trail and you come face to face with one of those things. Will it become hostile, or how does it behave?
You should be very lucky if you see a bobcat on a trail. They'll probably hear you from a mile away, and they're very less likely to see. But if that happens, they're just gonna disappear like a shadow, pretty much. Yeah, that's not a question here.
Will they only hunt, or do they eat dead things that they find? Do they scavenge?
They do scavenge, right? So they do scavenge. They do scavenge on deer, dead deer, but only when it's really, really fresh. So actually, my kids' school, like a science fair project, was that there was a deer that just died right in front of our driveway there, and then we put a camera on it. And the first night that we put a camera on, there was a bobcat came in and spent an hour eating from that carcass. But that was the only time it came. The moment it got a bit older, the carcass got to get stinky. Cats are picky, right? If it's fresh, it would come and eat. So they do eat. They do scavenge.
You could set up a feeder for your bobcat.
With fresh meat every day. Yes. Sorry.
So related to this slide right here, it seems like the key to the comeback of the bobcat was reforestation. What was the impetus to go from early 20th century to now? Was it mandated that we reforest? Are there new initiatives that could add more forests to Ohio?
Not necessarily. I'm not the expert in Ohio history per se, but the soil is it's not very great here for agriculture. So there used to be a lot of dairy farms, and I think the economy just switched from all purely agriculture to other uses, and I'll talk a little bit about mining, in a little bit, and a whole bunch of other. So it's kind of just came back naturally. There was no mandate per se, as far as I know. Oh, sorry, there was. Yeah.
How do you choose? What do you look for in a location where you're going to put a trail cam? Is there anything in particular?
It's a good question. So they do like to use trails. So I would say, if you find a deer trail, just like a regular animal trail in the woods, and you just put it there. They like to use ridges, so we put our camera traps lots of times right on top of the ridges, on the top of the ridge, or kind of like a flat area, or lower, right along a stream bed. So these are all good spots to do that. I think so somebody, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask what sparked your interest in bobcats?
That's a good question. I mean, I've been working with other cats. I've been working with lynx in Europe. So this was a project that kind of fell on our lap when I first got here. The state of Ohio needed some science to be done for, to figure out what's going on with the bobcat population. It was the right place at the right time, and that's how it happened. So I was just kind of jumped on it. Yes, there's.
I have the mic, so I'll go. I was going to make a couple observations in response to the question about reforestation.
Yes.
One, several of the industries that were very common here in the early 19th, early 20th century, particularly brick making and iron smelting, were extremely wood intensive. And that was part of the driver of reforestation. And then also, frankly, the transition to fossil fuels took a lot of pressure off wood as a fuel source, and then other sorts of building materials as well. And also, I have never seen a bobcat, but twice I've heard them. They're really distinctive sounds.
Yes. All right.
Oh my gosh, this is the biggest question of my entire life. Do bobcats have any symbiotic bonds with other animals, or are they just doing their own thing?
They're very solitary. Cool. They're on their own. Most cats are like that, except for lions, I guess.
How long has this research been going on?
Since 2018, 2017, late in 2017. Yeah, still going to some extent. Okay.
Oh,
You guys all want T-shirts, right?
I was just wondering. So, the early 20th century, obviously we've come a long way with the animals moving back in. Do you think that climate change is going to have an effect on the bobcats in the area and the other animals?
Well, definitely it's already having a big effect on other animals. With bobcats, it's interesting. Actually, bobcats might benefit from climate change to some extent. So on the northernmost part of their range, which is in Canada, they're actually limited by snow depth. So that's why you have lynx there, because they have big paws and it can be kind of walk on top of the snow, and bobcats sink. So if there's not as much snow, they might actually expand the range. Yeah. And again, it's
just a heads up for the audience. I opened a small and
Go ahead. Oh, sorry.
Roughly how many sightings a year are there for bobcat in Ohio?
How many sightings per year? Well, they've been increasing rapidly, like someone mentioned, because of the advent of camera traps. 10 years ago, you didn't have a camera trap in your backyard, and now everybody has multiple. So now it's in the hundreds, or more. So that's why we take that data with a grain of salt. Because of that, we know that there's a bias. So whenever we look at the data, it's mostly trying to do other sources of data, like those roadkills. I'll come back to them. They're super important because those are really much more indicative of what's happening to the population. I think there was somebody here. Oh, there. Okay.
How do bobcats support our ecosystem?
That's an amazing question. They are, so in Ohio, now that we don't have wolves and we don't have mountain lions, they are a top predator, right? So they're really at the top of the food chain. So a lot of research has been shown that they can basically regulate everything else underneath, right? By what they eat. Right, so they regulate small mammal populations. They really have this kind of top-down effect on the whole ecosystem. So, yeah, in most places that have other large carnivores, they are what's considered a mesopredator, and just not really at the top of the food chain. But here, it's bobcats and coyotes. That's like the two main species that are driving everything. All right. So.
Yeah. Sorry. So if bobcats were the apex predator in the ecosystem, except for wolves, when there had like the retreat of their population during the early 20th century, was there like an uptick in other small rodents and such that was like observable due to the lack of a bobcat?
That's a good question. I don't know if there's any data on that kind of stuff. I mean, lots of the rodents that they're eating, they're really dependent on either forest or kind of natural grasslands like voles, meadow voles and stuff. So if those habitats were not there and there was all clear cut and all pasture and dairy land, maybe there was not that much of a uptick. But that's just like me kind of speculating here. Yes.
So in the 1800s and the early 1900s, when you paid your taxes in Athens, you had to also submit squirrel skins. They were trying to eliminate the squirrel population because they had huge problems. And so just like the deer had to be reintroduced, the squirrels needed to be introduced. Does anybody know where the squirrels in Athens came from? Go ahead. Yep. Harvard.
From Harvard.
And that is not a myth. It is actually in the Board of Trustees minutes. They came from Harvard. We have Harvard squirrels.
I know that in the Amazon, they identify jaguars by the patterns on the skin. That apply also for bobcats?
It's a lot harder. They're a lot more variable. The only reliable spots that you can look at are right here on their chest. So you have to have the camera like really well pointed to that. It's not as easy as like the jaguars, lynx, all sort of other. They have like very unique spots. And I'll show you a bunch of pictures. They're super variable. Some of them are super beautiful and spotty, and some of them are just like kind of dull. So we wanted to do that, but we couldn't, unfortunately.
No more t-shirts, sorry.
Okay. One more question there, or? Okay, yeah, all right, thank you. Yes?
You said it's hard for them in the snow. Do they struggle in the winter? Do they kind of hibernate part of the time? Or what do they?
No, they just occur in areas that don't have like massive and continuous snowpack. Yeah. All right, moving on. All right. Cool. So this is how Ohio looks now, right? So the green stuff is forest. Agriculture in the brown, and urban areas in the red, right? So most of our research obviously is done here close to home, around Ohio, but it's also because it's really a good spot to study bobcats. So this habitat has recovered, but this is not the whole story, right? Other things happened in the 60s that really messed this land once again, and enter strip mining for coal, right? So like Amy was mentioning earlier, there was this transition from wood, right, to fossil fuels, and all of a sudden, coal country, right? Ohio, West Virginia, Kentucky, all those areas were strip mined for coal. So you had a bunch of these ginormous machines really, removing vegetation and dirt over like tens of thousands of acres. Right. And I'll show you, I'll tell you in a bit why this is important for bobcats. So, back in, these large areas look like Mars, like Elon Musk would have just gone there instead of going to Mars, probably. And for Ohio, per se, this is the main, this is this guy, the Big Muskie. Have you guys been to the Big Muskie bucket? Right? Okay, yeah, a bunch of you. It's absolutely crazy, absolutely impressive. This is Big Muskie. If you've seen the bucket, which can hold a marching band, can you imagine how big this is? Right? 22 stories tall. So this particular drag line is responsible for removing dirt from 60,000 acres in central Ohio. This huge area that now we know it as the wilds. Right? And we call them also, the broader area, it's called the AEP recreation lands, right? So they recreated the lands. So this bucket, which is like this big, right, did some insane feat of engineering because it could have, constructed 2 Panama canals by itself, right? It removed an insane amount of dirt. And then the whole landscape, just in this particular location, 60,000 acres, looked like Mars. And AEP lands are just this little spot here. There's a lot of other places in Ohio, right, that had the same fate. Right? So while the forest came back, we removed it once again, right, to be able to extract fossil fuel. So I want to point this area here, AEP recreation land. It's only about an hour north of here. If you guys haven't been to the wilds, strongly recommend it. Doesn't look like anything else like it would. You would think that it occurs in Ohio. You have all these like grasslands with exotic animals pasturing around. You're like, whoa, what's going on here? But very important for bobcats, because after this happened, now this is how AEP recreation lands look like, right? So there were a lot of work on reclamation of the strip mines. Some work that was good, meaning that they put back a layer of soil that was deep enough for trees to take root. In some other places, it was kind of a botched job where the soil that they put back was just maybe this thick. So now you have this like expensive grasslands, which is great for bobcats actually, right? So this is what it looks like. So now instead of forest, so this is all was strip mine, and now it's all this like green vegetation. It's all this kind of like grassland. So it's an absolutely amazing place. If you haven't been to just walking around there, it's just absolutely stunning. And we've been trying to study everything that's going on in there because it's not just bobcats that came back there. So we have amphibians, and we have all these grassland birds that shouldn't be there, but they are. Bobolinks and all sort of other really cool stuff. And Ohio Department of Natural Resources it's buying land basically from this huge 60,000 acre area to put into conservation. So the new Jesse Owens State Park that was just funded just a couple of years ago is actually part of this. It's a former like reclaimed mine land. All right, so going back to bobcats. So bobcats have been coming back and recolonizing Ohio since around mid-1900s. The first sightings, re-sightings, I guess, they've been around 1950 and 1960. Okay, yeah, back in 1920, when the bobcat was the mascot was established as the mascot of Ohio University, there was no bobcats in Ohio, most likely, right? The mighty bobcat was not here. It was just a dream. But because of this advent of camera traps and all these sightings, people got very excited about seeing bobcats. You see this absolutely exponential increase in number of sightings. Obviously, that doesn't mean that there's that many bobcats. The population increase like that. It's simply a bias due to, again, camera traps. However, this is still really good information spatially. And we're not taking those numbers at the face value, like, yes, we have 10,000 bobcats in Ohio right now. No, right? We don't do that kind of stuff. But it's a good information to figure out where those animals are, right? So they're here in Southeast Ohio, but you also find like some weird, in the middle of the corn fields, those are verified sightings. People sent a picture where there was a dead animal on the road, right? So they're doing a lot of other cool things that we didn't think they would. So we have these many sightings, and there was a study from Division of Wildlife that showed that most likely Ohio was colonized by bobcats from two different sources. So one source is here. So this is eastern Ohio, the wilds in that area. So this is kind of Bobcat Central. And they think that bobcats from West Virginia cross the river. They can swim, actually, like other cats, or just back in the day, the Ohio River used to freeze and just walk across. Colonized from West Virginia, and another population here in the south around Vinton and a bit south, with animals from Kentucky. Right? So they're a little bit distinct genetically up to 2012. So one thing that we wanted to do is figure out, okay, if they were distinct up to then, did they basically mixed? Do we have just one big population? Right. So this is some of the data that we used. And then the question now, the moment the bobcats came back, and this is a reoccurring question in any wildlife, in any state, or anything that, think about, look at wolves. I don't want to bring up the topic, because that's even more contentious. But whenever an animal comes back, there's going to be a bunch, of folks that are wanted to do something about it, and a bunch of folks that don't want to do anything about it, right? So now we're actually getting, and they are real, some of these reports that, their bobcats are raiding people's, chicken coops, and maybe getting some pets and all this kind of stuff, which is like, well, it's a predator. It's in the natural, environment. You don't have your chickens well penned. They might, fall prey to bobcats, but not just bobcats, but hawks and other things, right? So some of these things do happen. We don't know exactly how often, or what's the rate. I mean, cats are picky. It's kind of hard to pluck all those feathers to get to the meat. But obviously, there's a lot of folks that would like to see a trapping season, right? They want to see that, well, there's too many of them around, and we need to do something about them. And a lot of other folks that don't want to, they're just coming back. Come on, what are we doing here? Are we just, shooting ourselves in the foot again, right? So this conundrum here and this dichotomy of like, is it a fierce predator that we have to do something about, which, we've done something about predators for a long time and it was never good for the predator, or do we try to protect them as much as possible? So what Ohio did until 2012, they were on the endangered species list for Ohio, right? They were delisted in 2014, right? So they're not on any like special lists, but there's still no trapping allowed, right? So they're kind of keeping an eye on things. Let's see how the population is doing, and then this is where the science comes into play. Okay. So the market for furs, it's alive and well. You can actually buy a bobcat fur coat for $15,000 if you're into that kind of stuff and you have the money. So there's still a market for pelts. Probably that's not a huge market. It's not a lot of money for the trapper itself. But there's still something there, like a resource, right? That people see, there's very different different ways of thinking about nature, right? As a resource that you could use or something that you could just, enjoy. Right? They don't have to be mutually exclusive, but and sometimes they are. So then the question becomes, what is how much of a dead bobcat's worth versus how much a live bobcat's worth, right? As a apex predator in Ohio and as a species that we like to see come back. So in 2018, the Division of Wildlife actually proposed a trapping season, and it kind of blew up. It blew up in their face, basically. And what's happening is that there were a lot of public hearings back in early 2018 to figure out what the people wanted. There was proponents that wanted to see this happen. There were folks that were against it. So sometimes we have statements such as that one that pour more gasoline on the fire. That obviously didn't sit well with a lot of folks, right? This is not a resource that goes to waste, right? It's a living animal, right? But when you see the world as a resource that you can take, then it takes different connotations. So a big debate ensued, and a lot of folks in Athens were really on this side here, and we literally kind of got trapped. Right, so we just started this project just 6 months beforehand, and we had no data yet. We just put some cameras out there, and everybody was like, what are we going to do? You're the bobcat expert. And I was like, I just got to Ohio. I have no idea about bobcats. But with very smart and a lot of help from the media relations and some smart crafted messages from Ohio University, we're able to kind of circumvent all this. And the result was that despite the fact that Ohio Division of Wildlife, who was funding this project, said that, yes, we want to trap them, they kind of backed off afterwards. And then the state of Ohio said, okay, well, we don't have science yet. We don't have any data. This is what Ohio University is telling us. We need to, we got to wait. And that actually satisfied both parties, which is kind of cool. So it's kind of from this really pretty conflictual situation, there was a consensus among both the outdoor community and environmentalists that, you know what, we can wait. There's no reason to just jump into something when we really have nothing, right? So then that allowed us to actually do science and have data, and now tell people what bobcats are doing in Ohio, right? So that was kind of interesting. So, right, science to the rescue. So we did a lot of things. So I think had dozens of undergraduates working in this project and graduate students and just like members of the community, and it was kind of a really cool process overall. But we had a really, really, really hard task, right? So Division of Wildlife was completely transparent with us, and they gave us everything they had in terms of data, right? Because they've been collecting data for a long time. And what they told us, they were like, well, you got to solve the puzzle. Like, you really got to take all these types of data, those sightings that I showed you the map, roadkills, necropsies, camera trap, all sort of things, and just we give you all the stuff that we have. You do some more science where you think the gaps are, the holes are in data, and then in the end, you put it all together and give us an idea about how the bobcats are doing in Ohio, right? And I was like, okay, have no idea what we were getting into at the time, right? And then the idea was to really take it all and put it into a story that makes sense for managers, and for the general public, and mostly for the species, right? For the bobcats. We work for the bobcats. So, I don't even know what time. Which time we have here? Oh, shoot. Okay. Well, all right. So we did a bunch of different things. So we started with some really basic questions, like where are the bobcats? Like in Ohio, are they just in the forest? Are they everywhere in the forest? Right? Do we know how many bobcats are there? That's the $1 million question that everybody's asking us, and my answer is like I have no clue, because there's no way you can actually count all the animals in Ohio. And that's not just for any population, right? Unless you have fish in a fish tank, it's kind of hard to count things. The dead bobcats, super important to tell us a lot of different information about the risk of roadkill, who dies on the roads, what the survival is, and then put it all together into this really cool, almost like a game, where we look at different scenarios of how bobcats are doing. So what we did, we actually took as much as we'd have loved to cuddle bobcats and trap them and do all these things, we decided to not do that, because nowadays we have a lot of methods that are called non-invasive methods to research that can tell us a lot more things than just cuddling a bobcat, which is cool, but whatever. So what we did, we used seasons of observations, we used camera traps, we used some hair snares, we used a lot of poop, with a lot of poop science, and a lot of roadkill, right? So we just absolutely non-invasive. We didn't trap, didn't touch a live bobcat. So this is already the work of two graduate students, Heidi Benson, master's student that graduated in 2018, and Marissa Dick, that's a Ph.D. student she has another year to go, and she, for this work, actually, she won the top national award for the graduate award from the American Society for Mammalogists, which is like the top, professional society in her field. So kudos to her. So in terms of bobcats, where they are, so we use this data from citizen scientists, kind of cleaned it up a little bit, it wasn't as messy, and we used these points where animals were detected to come up with these models to relate those points to some sort of like landscape features, like percent of forest, percent of pasture, density of roads, distance to roads, all sort of other variables, and ultimately come up with a pretty map. It's all about pretty maps, right? Where that shows us that the suitability of bobcats is very high in this area in Southeast Ohio, but still patchy. There's some areas that are more or less better. But then also this idea of this kind of desert, right, for bobcats in the kind of central and eastern and western Ohio, right? So we got this habitat suitability map, which DNR was very excited to see. So Athens is here, and then like any model, it's all just as good as the data that you put into it. So it's kind of hard to validate it, but a little bit like a month after we actually finished up this map and showed it to the Division of Wildlife, the first sighting in that part of Ohio happened right in that red dot in the Summit Metro Park. And we were like, yes, we nailed it. We actually maybe it's actually a good map. So that was cool. So then, went really like psychedelic and constructed this like connectivity map that tells us where, if bobcats can actually travel and exchange gene and they can disperse through Ohio. And what we found is that there are some really interesting pinch points, like right here between like Cincinnati, Dayton, and this area, that it's kind of just this very narrow corridor for movement for these animals. So it's probably a good way to like keep an eye on that and not disturb it too much. But also the fact that there's a lot of movement, potential movement all the way going north. So even if there's not a lot of sightings right now, they probably will be. Like usually, overall what we found is that the population is still expanding numerically and spatially, right? So it's not at what we call like equilibrium, right? So it's still going.
Are neighboring states also doing research on bobcats? I'm curious if we take away the state boundaries.
Viorel, repeat the question.
Yeah, so the question was whether other states or neighboring states are doing research on bobcats, and the answer is yes. Yeah, so Indiana has a fairly similar history to Ohio in terms of recovery of bobcats. West Virginia, not so much. In West Virginia, they're trapped. They trap like thousands of them a year, and I think they shoot them as well. They opened the trapping season in Illinois, which is also a little premature because it's, again, kind of the same kind of recovery history, but didn't seem to affect the population that much yet. The jury's still out there. But yeah, there's research going on, and we do work with Indiana folks quite a bit. So once we figure out like kind of this big picture thing, we also wanted to know a bit more, kind of delve into the details. The fact that we have all these red areas in Ohio doesn't mean that there are really bobcats behind every bush, right? So what we did put a lot of camera traps, and we did years of camera trapping, focused on public lands in southeast Ohio, so AEP recreational lands, Wayne, Zaleski, Vinton, all these areas. We got a lot of bobcats. There's a lot of bobcats, a lot of pictures, a lot of really cool pictures. All the animals that we found really, they looked in great shape. They were not starving. They were not diseased. They were not. They looked really great. And then to attract the animals to the camera, somebody was asking about that. We actually used this really stinky lure that smells like skunk. Like, it's absolutely disgusting. We almost got kicked out of Irvine Hall by a bunch of times because we had to like bring it back up to the freezer. But it elicits this crazy response from bobcats. They love that. It's like giving your cat catnip, right? They just like go crazy for it, and they roll around, right? And they do all this really cool, we were hoping to get hair from them, but that didn't work. All right. And then you also have kittens. So this was like the best thing, right, that we could find, right? To have like, mom and kittens and rolling around. And we found a lot of kittens, which means that, the population is doing really well in reproducing, and the kittens are surviving, and it's really good. So there's a cute kitten right there. And again, kind of the same thing, they're coming in and rubbing and playing. we find all this like disturbed area around the traps. It's pretty cool. And also we found, this is the first time we actually found, so this is a large kitten. This is almost before they disperse and move away from their mom. So that was one, that was two, that was three, and there's the mom. Right, so this was the first time we actually found a three kitten litter. But then afterwards, so this was back in 2017, this was a single one that year, and now we see 3 kitten litters a lot more often.
Viorel, I have an unrelated question, but it's been in the chat for a while. Evolutionarily, why is it advantageous to have a bobbed tail?
I have no clue. If there's any evolutionary biologists in the audience, I don't know. Miles, do you have any thoughts on that? Yeah, if you're not running a lot, like, needing to have a big tail for balance, I guess, then you don't need it. Sorry?
It's not going to cut and brush.
It's not going to, yeah, I mean, there's, right, so like I said, we have tons of kittens, which is pretty nice, and we also have the Spice Girls, or, maybe Backstreet Boys, I don't know, one of those. We have found some bears, which is kind of cool. So a lot of really neat stuff, but also a lot of coyotes. Right, so I was talking about all this coyote and bobcats, the top predators. And what we found, actually, something that was not on the radar, but got to be super, super interesting, is this interaction between bobcats and coyotes, which is what Marissa got an award for, where we found that despite the fact that the habitat was great, all the camera locations where we found bobcats, there's only about 40 to 50% of them, right? So there's still some holes. Basically, the habitat is not fully occupied. But that was 2017, 2018. Right now, I think it's probably a bit more than that. But one thing that we found, which was kind of cool, and these are all of our camera traps, and these are a number of pictures of bobcats or coyotes at camera traps, and you kind of see this split almost. If you put it on a map, it's really cool. You can see this big bubbles, let's say, in terms of number of pictures where you see all coyotes or all bobcats, right? So what we think is happening is that they're kind of partitioning habitats to some extent, right? So and the really cool about the thing about the bobcats is that coyotes were here when the bobcats started to come in. So what's happening right now, and this is really evident and kind of anecdotal evidence as well from trappers. Having a beer with some trappers actually gives you a lot of information. Very useful. I mean, they're the ones that are in the woods a lot more than I am, actually. Right? And what they've been saying is that around Athens area is that some areas that have been trapping coyotes for the last 20 years, and 1 year just switched. Right, and they've trapped bobcats. They usually release them if possible. The traps are kind of indiscriminate, but they never trapped coyotes in those areas. So what's happening? I would think that what's happening is that these bobcats are kind of badass. They come in and really take territories from coyotes' range. So, and this is happening just as we speak, which is pretty neat. All right, then counting bobcats, well, it's very hard, like I mentioned. This is one of those things in wildlife ecology that it's never satisfactory. You always want to know how many animals are there, and the truth is that you never know how many animals are there. So we can't really count them by spots, unfortunately. Oops. So what we did, we used poop science, right? So you can do a lot of things with poop. It's also called environmental DNA, as a fancy way to do it. But with poop, you can do many things. You can figure out what species is from, so using genetics, right? You can figure out what species is from. Is it coyote, is it bobcat, is it fox? Once you identified bobcat poop, you can then go into it and identify individuals, right? Just based on their genetic makeup. So you can say, this is animal 1, Joe, that pooped 5 times in this area, and this is bobcat 2, Jill, that did something similar. And then you can even go even further, and you can look at diet. So based on, you can sequence that poop, and you can figure out what they ate, what species were in that. And this is something that we're doing right now with a colleague in the department. All right, so what we found, we initially brought scat detection dogs to sniff bobcat scats, and they failed. So we did the next best thing, which is undergraduates. They did not sniff bobcat poop. They just went around on these transects and collected everything they found. And you couldn't imagine how much poop is out there. There's tons. They all poop on roads for whatever reason. So we collected a lot of scats, a lot of bobcat scats, and then with help with our colleagues from the wilds, they have a really good genetics lab and genetic expertise. We're able to determine all those, Joe and Jill, and where they pooped, and put them into some sophisticated models to come up with numbers. So what we found is that the AEP lands, those trashed lands that now are recovered, have 20 bobcats per 100 square kilometer, which is basically similar to places that are fully recovered in Virginia and West Virginia, right? So in those areas, they're really back. They're up to where they need to be, basically. But south here in Zaleski and Vinton, we still, and again, this is 2018, 2019 data, right? So a little dated, only about half of that, right? And the hypothesis here is that, when you have all these open lands, you have a lot more small mammals, right? So you have a lot of chunky voles that are, meadow voles and all sort of other things that are much easier to catch. And Division of Wildlife actually found that home ranges of bobcats in the AEP land are much smaller than in Vinton and Zaleski, meaning that they have a lot more resources that they can actually access really easily, versus in south here, they eat squirrels a lot. So squirrels are a bit harder to catch and find. All right, so I'll kind of rush through some of this. Bobcats cannot tell us a lot of things when they die. They can tell us where they died, right? So that's important information. They tell us who dies on roads, which is very important from a population perspective, right? There's one thing for like a young male disperser to die versus a female that's reproductively active and can produce a lot of kittens. From a population perspective, it's a huge, huge difference. So we wanted to know who dies on roads. So Ohio is the land of roads. Ohio Department of Transportation is very excited to report all this, right? In the country, despite the fact that we are, I don't know, like population-wise, kind of midway, we have a lot of roads. You cannot really travel more than about a mile from a road until you get to another mile from another road, right? So there's a ton of roads, and cats and roads don't mix because they can do this, right? You cannot keep a cat, inside. So I want to show you something here, because this is what. Oh man, uh-oh. How do I do this? I don't know if I can actually show you guys this. That's not good. Oh man, my videos are. Oh, there we go. Maybe. Watch on YouTube. No, sorry guys. I worked on my computer, but I think I had to click on that screen. Sorry, I just showed that they're crazy. Like if you watch some cat, like just Google like bobcats catching squirrels, and it's just absolutely insane. They just they fly through the air and catch them like in the air. So you cannot keep a bobcat, out of a road by putting a fence there. Basically, that's what I'm trying to. Anyway, damn, my funny cat videos didn't work. All right. But what we defined is like this. What we call like the triangle of death here, which are Interstate 70 and 77, where you have a lot of dead bobcats. And we think, we estimated that maybe 6% or maybe even more of the bobcat population probably gets killed on road every year, right? And Larry can attest there. He's got a lot of dead bobcats and skeletons in his collection, right? So then we also found that who dies on roads, which is very interesting. So we found that there was more males that died on roads than females, which is great, right? Because in population ecology, we all care about females. Males are just like, there. The females are the ones reproducing and the ones that do all the work, basically. So we had a lot of undergraduates and graduate students coming in and basically dissecting necropsy, dissecting bobcats in central classroom. And we also found that the animals that get killed on roads are mostly young animals, like 1-year-olds. That's when they go out and into the world, basically. They leave the mom's nest, basically, and then just disperse. And they're naive, and they get killed, basically. They get run over. And the good news that we found is that very few females and adult females actually get killed on roads, right? So they're either, more, careful or, anyway, it's good news. And yeah. That's a good question. Maybe like 10 years we found. So we were able to age them based on the tooth. Like basically they have like rings like a tree. And we got like 9-year-old bobcat in Ohio, which is kind of cool. But they live probably longer.
I hate to do this.
I know, sorry.
We're out of time.
I know. Too many questions.
Well, I tell you what we're going to do is we're going to roll the video just for a few more minutes. If anybody wants to stay here, I'll give you 5 more. It's because of the T-shirts. I know we interrupted you a lot. Okay. So 5.
No, that's good. It was a good conversation. All right. Well, so what we ended up doing, really taking all this stuff, and we started playing games with it, right? So we took data on who dies on roads, on different survival rates for different age classes, on habitat suitability, on this density estimates that we found, on dispersal rates, how far they go, how many of them, who goes. We had all this information either from Ohio or from literature. And then we plugged this into really sophisticated population model, or a population viability analysis that allowed us to, basically seed bobcats, right? So this is all computer simulation. So what we did, we took, virtual bobcats and we dumped them in these cells, which are 10 by 10 kilometer cell. And then we allowed them to breed, right, reproduce, die by car, die by natural mortality, disperse to other cells, according to some rules that we set in the simulation. So then you run this for many, many years, many replicates, and you come up with this kind of trajectory. It's like, this is what the population should be, with a lot of assumptions behind it. But we're not really necessarily interested in numbers per se. We're interested in what's happening if you add mortality to it, right? So if you add trapping mortality with or harvest pressure that increases from at a low level to something bigger, you find that populations are not growing as fast, or they can actually decline, right? And if you add in more roadkill, so Ohio Department of Transportation is forecasting that there's going to be even more cars on roads over the next decades, right? More trucks actually, which is their worst. Then when you do that, then those mortalities really compound, right? So for example, this scenario here is really bad, right? Where you have a lot of harvest and a lot of additional mortality. So the conclusion here was that, probably, and we couldn't really give DNR an answer exactly, or Division of Wildlife an answer of can we or can we not trap, right? What we give them is that the population is doing great, right? If you add additional sources of mortality, like trapping, even if it's a little bit, you might see population maybe declining. And the reason is that there's still not they're not, like I said, they're not at equilibrium, right? They're still expanding. They're still kind of dynamic in terms of how they're doing, right? So, in terms of the future, well, could be this. It's been a theme here: things in space. We're not going to send bobcats in space, but what I'm trying to say is that the future is still unwritten, right? So the future actually depends on people in this room and everybody in the state of Ohio, right? Because the bobcats are doing what bobcats do, right? They're going to go and expand and increase in numbers, and everything is going to be fine for them. But the people's values and whether to trap or not to trap, that's going to make the difference, right? So the idea is that this is going to come up at some point, maybe not this year, maybe not next year, but soon. And if you feel strongly one way or the other, doesn't matter, the state needs your input. Right, so there's going to be all these public hearings. There's going to be all these things going on before any decision is taken. So people's input are going to what drive the future of bobcats in Ohio. And of course, trying to do more science. And this thing that we were stressing out with Division of Wildlife is that you got to keep an eye on things. And this is not the end of it. I mean, we did all this work, but we know that this is not, they're not at equilibrium. So things are going to change, in the future. You're going to get bobcats up in Ashtabula and up in Cleveland eventually. So that's going to change things. So keeping an eye on things, it's super important. I'm done now.
We're done.
Okay. Thank you.
I think they would have kept you here for another hour.
Buy me a beer.
If you have questions, please feel free.
No more t-shirts though. Yes, Soichi. Welcome. Yeah, so it has really high diversity. So we did have a genetic study on all the dead bobcats that we could get our hands on, and they have really high genetic diversity. And we found that they completely mixed. So all those populations that were in eastern Ohio, southern Ohio doesn't exist anymore. It's just one single population. And this is why we see all these bobcats in Athens, and we've seen in the recent years, because they're coming. We were kind of like in the middle, they're like on the forefront. Yes, Helena? So the genotype, so the individual for abundance, it's at the wilds, and Diego Alvarado Serrano is working with Marissa to do the metagenomic analysis. Yeah, so I'm doing that here. Yes? I don't know, but I don't think so. Yeah, no, we've got to talk to the geneticist. I'm like not a genetics person, so I just pawn. It's not that expensive, right? Yeah, I was about to say, yeah, it's not super expensive. Yeah.
I can guarantee at undergrad what we get a publication.
Oh, yeah.
100% guarantee.
Yeah, okay.
We just have to do it.
Things in the genome.